From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We're very proud of what took place today. I think our whole relationship with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula is it's going to be a very much different situation than it has in the past. And we're going to take care of a very big and very dangerous problem for the world. And I want to thank Chairman Kim.
After an historic summit in Singapore, President Trump and North Korean President Kim Jong-un have pledged to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. It marked the first time the leaders of the two countries have ever met. After the summit, President Trump announced the end of U.S. war games with South Korea, admitting the exercises have been very provocative and inappropriate. We'll air highlights from Trump and Kim's remarks.
우리는 오늘 역사적인 이 만남에서
We had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind, and we are about to sign a historic document.
세상은 아마
The world will see a major change.
We'll go to Singapore, to Washington and Chicago for the latest. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have wrapped up an historic summit in Singapore where they pledged to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The summit marked the first ever meeting between a sitting U.S. president and a North Korean leader. Following the historic meeting, President Trump announced the end of U.S.-South Korean war games.
We'll be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should. But we'll be saving a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I think it's very provocative.
That was President Trump speaking at a news conference early this morning. It was his first full news conference in more than a year. Trump also expressed hope for an end to the Korean conflict.
An extremely bloody conflict ravaged the Korean Peninsula. Countless people died in the conflict, including tens of thousands of brave Americans. Yet while the armistice was agreed to, the war never ended, to this day, never ended. But now we can all have hope that it will soon end, and it will soon end. The past does not have to define the future.
After headlines, we'll go to Singapore for more on this historic meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. In major immigration news, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced Monday domestic violence will no longer be grounds for asylum, a far-reaching shift that could affect thousands of women fleeing gender-based violence, particularly from Central America. Sessions overturned a precedent set in a 2014 Immigration Appeals Court ruling that had granted asylum to a Guatemalan woman named Aminta Cifuentes, who'd fled to the United States after being brutally abused by her husband for years, beaten, kicked, burned with acid, punched so hard in the stomach when she was 8 months pregnant her child was born prematurely and with bruises. He told her it was pointless to go to the police because, quote, even the police and judges beat their wives. She did go to the authorities, who recommended she leave him, but when she did, he tracked her down, raped her, threatened to kill her. She then fled to the United States, where she finally won asylum. But on Monday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions overturned the precedent set in her case, ruling, quote, claims by aliens pertaining to domestic violence or gang violence perpetrated by non-governmental actors will not qualify for asylum, he said. Immigration lawyers have condemned the ruling, which could have sweeping effects not only for women fleeing domestic violence, but all people fleeing gang-based violence. Karen Musalo of the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at the University of California Hastings College of Law said, quote, what this decision does is yank us all back to the dark ages of human rights and women's human rights, unquote. This comes as the Washington Post is reporting that the Honduran asylum seeker who died by suicide after Border Patrol agents forcibly separated him from his 3-year-old child had come to the United States with his family fleeing violence. The Honduran consulate says Marco Antonio Munoz and his family fled Honduras after Munoz's brother-in-law was murdered. After they arrived in the U.S., they voluntarily surrendered to Border Patrol agents and said they wanted to apply for asylum. But when agents told Munoz Munoz. He would be separated from his 3-year-old son. He appears to have had a panic attack. The agents then ripped the boy out of his arms, transported Munoz to a Texas jail where he was found dead by suicide the following morning. A newly published open letter signed by over 1,000 mental health professionals and organizations, has condemned the Trump administration's practice of separating children and parents at the border, writing, quote, "We cannot afford to forget that there's a history of separating children from their parents during slave auctions, during the forced assimilation of American Indians, and during the Holocaust. To somehow convince ourselves that this systematic traumatization of children has no bearing on the lives of these children and no impact on the legacy of our country is to be living in an alternate universe. And to not care about the impact these policies have on these children is to succumb to the worst potential of humanity," the letter said. In a major voting rights case, the Supreme Court has ruled 5-4 to uphold Ohio's decision to aggressively purge voters from the rolls. The ruling allows Ohio to purge voters from the rolls if they haven't voted in recent elections and don't respond to a notice from election officials. A 2016 Reuters survey found nearly 150,000 people were removed from the voting rolls in recent years in Ohio's 3 largest counties alone. A handful of other states have similar voting laws. The ruling to uphold Ohio's decision to remove voters from the rolls is part of a nationwide battle over voter suppression efforts pushed by the Republican Party. On Monday, scores of people were arrested in front of the Supreme Court as part of a national day of action for the new Poor People's Campaign protesting poverty and racism. This is Reverend Dr. William Barber speaking at the rally just before he, too, was arrested.
How many of you understand how the Supreme Court justices get on the court? They get what? Nominated by who? President. And then they get what? By the Senate. How do senators get into office? Voting. So you understand why voting suppression is a labor issue? Yeah. Voter suppression is not just a black issue, it's a labor issue, it's a poor people's issue. Because if you suppress the vote, you undermine the ability to elect people. And if you undermine the ability to elect people, you get people elected that will give you a regressive Supreme Court. So you can't separate voting rights from labor rights. It's not that the black folk over here fighting for voting rights and the white folk over here fighting for labor rights. We all better be fighting for all of our rights, every one of them.
9 religious leaders led by Reverend Liz Theoharis were arrested at the Supreme Court and have been held overnight in jail by Capitol Police. They were among dozens of people arrested in nationwide protests staging a moral revival 50 years after Martin Luther King Jr.'s original Poor People's Campaign. In downtown Boston, protesters blocked traffic to demand a higher minimum wage. In Olympia, Washington, activists erected tents to protest homelessness and unaffordable housing. In Sacramento, California, hundreds rallied outside the California Association of Realtors office to protest evictions. Monday's actions were part of the Poor People's Campaign's 5th week of nationwide protests, leading to a major march in Washington on June 23rd. The Washington Post is reporting President Trump's daughter, Ivanka, and her husband, Jared Kushner, both advisors to President Trump, raked in at least $82 million in outside income last year, even as both served as senior White House advisors. Ivanka Trump received nearly $4 million